I am engaged in a trilogy. That's the only use I'm going to make of slides. PowerPoint is evil, you understand, and you should expunge it from your life. But here are the 3 volumes of the trilogy. I was going to make it 6 volumes. It started as 1 volume, then it was going to be 4, then it was 6, and I decided that that's pathological. 6 volumes is just out of this. In fact, I was going to call it, in a vulgar combination of Latin and Greek, I could somehow work Sanskrit into it too. I was going to call it a sexology and sell a lot of copies. But I'm trying to bring to a conclusion Volume 3, and it'll just be an ordinary trilogy. The motivation of the trilogy is to persuade that group of which every person here is a member, I call the clerisy, the intelligentsia and the artists, the filmmakers, the rock musicians, all the communicators and shapers of our minds, the priests, the writers, to persuade them of what I think our central theme is in this conference, to persuade them that what we ill-advisedly call capitalism can be ethical. It can also be unethical. And that's a choice we face. It's not built into the nature of this system. And that's the point of the first volume, the Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce, which is a virtue ethical approach to our commercial lives. It's not utilitarian or consequentialist. It's not Kantian or justice-only oriented. It claims that one can have an ethical life in a commercial society, and indeed that it's corrupting for people like me, economists. Even I'm a Chicago school economist. Maybe you haven't ever seen one. Milton Friedman was a personal friend of mine. I apologize if that offends you, but in that classic apology that politicians always make, I apologize if that offends you. The argument is that a modern and indeed strikingly female in the modern world, modern departments of philosophy approach to ethics, which is to, well, talk about particular virtues, love, courage, temperance, justice, faith, and hope, and even prudence, the economist's favorite virtue, is the way to balance a life in commerce or a life anywhere else. Prudence only, however, is the theory of the economists, particularly the Chicago School economists. This book by Steve, what's his name, called Freakonomics is a perfect example of this. It's prudence only. So the other virtues, no, I don't want to hear about love or justice. My former colleague, Gary Becker, in a famous paper on the economics of marriage, a long time ago, said, you know, marriage between these agents called M and F, is a matter of prudence, a matter of exchange. M, it turns out, I mean, just by accident, is very good at automotive repair. F is good at cooking, so they get together. That's what marriage is about. And then he said, and he actually said this, some people will say that marriage has to do with love. And he actually put it in scare quotes. Love. Well, yeah, maybe it has to do with love. But I'm an economist. I specialize in prudence. Not the virtue of love, but the virtue of prudence. So, in a way, all three of my books are an attack on that conception of economic science, that it should be only about prudence. Now, look, I'm an economist. I believe in free trade. I believe in mutually advantageous exchange. I believe in supply and demand curves. I believe in prudence as a way of modeling some kinds of behavior in the economy. Although as I get older, I get more and more interested in entry and exit as the key, the biological principle in economics as the key to understanding an economy. But nonetheless, prudence is a virtue. It's something we try to teach our children and our dogs. Look both ways when you cross the street. Prudence, savoir-faire, know-how is a virtue. It's one of the 7 principal virtues in the Christian tradition, and as Minister Das has shown, there are parallel virtues in the South Asian tradition. But prudence only, which is especially what modern economists, I call them Samuelsonian economists, after the name comes from my mother's mixed doubles tennis partner, Paul Samuelson. Prudence only is not sufficient for a truly scientific economics. I discovered, I didn't know this before I started working on this series, but I discovered that I'm advocating what Bart Wilson calls humanomics. Economics with the humans left in. So instead of this this central figure in prudence-only economics, I call him Max U, Vietnamese Jew. I don't know quite what his ethnicity is, but he's maximizing utility subject to constraints, Max U. I say he would be a more sensible person if he had a gender change and became Maxine U. But he's the dominant figure, and he's a sociopath by construction. He's a sociopath. He regards other people as vending machines. And his pleasure, you could call it, or his happiness, depends entirely on the inputs that these vending machines can make into him. So he loves not for the beloved's own sake, the third and highest form of friendship that Aristotle speaks of, but for pleasure or profit, the first 2 of the motives for friendship in Aristotle's way of talking. This is a corrupting way of looking at the world. That is this Max U way of looking. It's useful if you're going to talk about covered interest arbitrage on the foreign exchange markets. I advise you not to include love. It's not going to get you much insight into arbitrage in highly prudence-only contexts. But in most other contexts, human beings are cooperative, to put it another way, as well as competitive. A modern economy depends massively on cooperation. I bought my sari blouse yesterday at a tiny little tailor shop in town. And I had to try it on to make sure it fit. And so my little tailor shop talked to his friend, the other tailor shop, who had a little teeny dressing room. And they cooperated. That is, my tailor was allowed to use the other tailor's dressing room for me to try out the blouse. Now that's how business actually works. The clerisy don't know anything about the business world. Their source for understanding of the business world is Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol, as far as I can make out. And they regard business people as competing as nature does, red in tooth and claw. And there's some of that. There's some of that prudence-only behavior in the economic world, and some of it is very good for other people and not so good perhaps for the development of the ethical self. But it's there, I admit it. But these other virtues that I mentioned are there very much and are part of a well-functioning capitalist society. And we professors of economics need to stop telling people that all that matters is prudence, and that the only possible model of human behavior is Max U, and that love is to be set aside. The second volume is much more economic. It's much more about economic history, but it comes to the same conclusion. It says that the usual explanations of why we are so rich, and you know, I'm in a poor country right now, but look around you. Everyone here is the descendant of an unspeakably poor person. A crowd of people. Everyone, including me. Irish, peasants, Indian peasants, Pakistani peasants, peasants, right back to the invention of agriculture, and then before that, right back to the caves with the hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years. And we were very, very poor. $3 a day is my symbolic figure. There are people on the streets of this town who earn less than that, who survive on $1 a day. And yet here we are of a Saturday morning discussing the philosophy of the economy and is it moral and blah, blah, blah. This is not something that our ancestors had time to do. They couldn't have a coffee break. They were hitching up their saris and planting rice. So how have we gotten from that extremely poor past to what we hope in India can be the extremely rich future? if India were to go back to the policies of the 1990s in a thorough way, to the liberalization of the interaction of the government with the economy, India would grow not just by night, but by day. And within 2 generations, Indians could have, say, within 2, could have an American standard of living. This is true. This is what China is on the way to accomplishing. Now, China is not a democracy, and many's the slip twixt cup and lip, as we say. Lots of things can go wrong in China. And you have the advantage of being a democracy, but it's also the disadvantage, so watch out. But the argument in the second book is the usual material explanations don't work. Exploitation, we've heard of this, doesn't work. Imperialism may have been very grievously painful for the Africans and Asians and South Americans and so on who experienced it. No doubt. Probably. I understand. But that doesn't mean that an equivalent amount of gain went to the metropolis. That in the Belgian Congo, it used to be called the Belgian Congo, the king of Belgium, who owned the Belgian Congo outright, that's how it was organized, had his soldiers cut off the hands of anyone who didn't get enough rubber out of the jungle, was very bad for the Congolese. But it did no good at all for the ordinary Belgians at home. The king used the money to build castles in the south of France. I mean, I'm not making this up. This was true in the late 19th century. So it's not at all obvious that the amount of hurt from imperialism is equal to the amount of gain to the European imperialists. Not at all. It's not, doesn't follow. And so I go through all the standard economic explanations. Rising savings rates. A, they didn't happen, which is a bar to arguing that they're the cause of the Industrial Revolution, I should think. And B, capital accumulation is not what made the modern world. That's the main conclusion of the second volume. And that's what's wrong with the word capitalism. The word capitalism embodies the idea very strongly held by Marxists and by Chicago School economists and by everyone in between, that accumulation of capital is what made the modern world. And this is rubbish. This is not true. Capital accumulation, which my friend Bill Easterly points this out most eloquently. He says that the problem with foreign aid since the Second World War is that it's had this view that he calls capital fundamentalism. That if you pour money, foreign aid, government-to-government foreign aid into Ghana and give Red China, as he once called it, not a cent, obviously Ghana will become rich and Red China will never increase in income. Well, it hasn't quite worked out that way. Accumulating capital didn't make the modern world. So all kinds of arguments fall by the wayside. I also argue in the book that the currently fashionable thoughts about institutions are mistaken. My old friend Doug North is one of the initiators of this. Doug says that you pour institutions into an economy and mix. That's the recipe. Put a Supreme Court into an economy, into society, mix it up, put it up, and that'll work. And my conclusion in the second volume is it doesn't look like it. I mean, after all, the most absurd example of this is the old Soviet Constitution, which, was a wonderful constitution. Free speech, free press, freedom of assembly. Feel free, unless you actually exercise the freedom. So in this last volume, The Treasured Bourgeoisie, of which the paper you have, it's also on my website, is about. That paper is a selection of the India-specific passages in Volume 3. I can make available a reasonably good draft of Volume 3 to anyone who wants to have it, and electronic copy, as long as you promise to buy all the books. This is Volume 1, and you'll have that, and then you'll get Bourgeois Dignity, and then you'll have Volume 3, The Treasured Bourgeoisie, and I live in hope that the University of Chicago Press will issue a boxed set of the three. How cool is that? Harry Potter and the Bourgeois era. If I earn 1/100th of her royalties, I'll die rich as well as happy. These, by the way, make excellent birthday presents. Your mother will be delighted to have a copy of the Bourgeois Virtues, Bourgeois Dignity, in the third volume by her bed. And the argument of Volume 3 is very simple. Well, no, it's not that simple, actually. It's rather complicated. But it's trying to explain why ethics changed in early modern northwestern Europe in a way that it's changed in a fundamental way in India in the last 30 years, and in China in the last 30 years, the same way. Now, what do I mean? I don't mean that the individual behavior of business people has radically changed in any of those places. Not in the 16th, 17th, 18th century in Holland first. Holland, it all starts with the Dutch. And then the English and the Scots in the 18th century, the North American English colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries, in Belgium in the early 19th century, France in the early 19th century, Germany in the middle of the, et cetera, et cetera. What changed is not the individual behavior of entrepreneurs. This, I think, is a great error. It's the Max Weber fundamental attribution error, I call it, for complicated reasons. Max Weber was wrong. It's not the Protestant ethic that explains the modern world, as is rather obvious, since though there are some Protestants here over in close to the spice market, I noticed a big Baptist church, so there are some Protestants in India, but they're not most of the entrepreneurs. It's not hard work or high savings. Uncle Max, now this now is not Max you, but Uncle Max, Max Weber. Uncle Max got it completely wrong. He, like a lot of, well, he didn't really understand business very well. He thought that business was about sort of idiots pursuing, working hard. Now, time out. Peasants work hard. There's a wonderful Filipino song in English, actually. Planting rice is never fun, bent from morn to set of sun, cannot stand and cannot sit, cannot rest a little bit. Peasants work hard. Peasants save a gigantic amount, particularly in wheat areas or barley areas. They have to put back into the soil, particularly under earlier conditions, earlier conditions, they had to put back a gigantic percentage of their crop into the ground. When you see these paintings of French peasants, the famous painting by, is it Monet or Manet? Corot, the famous Corot painting of the man, the French peasant or whatever he is, casting his children's dinner. They're crying, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm hungry." Casting their children's dinner, his children's dinner, on the ground so that they won't starve next year. That's a gigantic exercise of what economists call abstention from consumption, namely saving. So saving behavior, prudence of a kind of routine sort, is universal. It's only from the aristocracy or the clerisy that you could believe that, you know, all you need to do is work harder, dear, and everything will be fine. So I claim that what happened is not a change in individual entrepreneurial behavior, which I think is the big mistake in modern thinking about the entrepreneur. It's not that Indian entrepreneurs are suddenly woken up and before they were just sitting around eating that horrible stuff you eat, the betel nut or whatever it's called, and not doing saving and just sort of hanging out. Now and then they woke up in 1991, now I'll get to work. No, that's not it. What happened is the society's attitude towards these people changed. So the change was sociological, ethical, ideological, a change in ideas about other people. And that's what caused the modern world. My claim, and I hope I'm right, but I'm open to argument, and I don't know if I'm right, and this is just the beginning. I'm not sure I'm right. My conclusion of this trilogy turns out to be that what matters for economic growth, for enrichment in both senses, in the material sense and in the spiritual sense, is not the usual suspects, rounding up the usual suspects, but is ideas. Now this actually is a very 18th century idea about ideas. That ideas matter, that ideology matters, that how we think of each other, and what I would say in sort of imitation of Alexis de Tocqueville, I'd say it's habits of the lip that matter. He said habits of the heart and mind. He learned this, by the way, from a Bostonian. Habits of the heart and mind is what Tocqueville focused on, and he's mostly, I agree with Tocqueville on these matters. But the one turn he didn't quite make is to realize that it's the rhetoric, how we talk about entrepreneurs, markets, exchange, improvement, most of all, whether we like improvement or trammel it, enchain it with red tape, and green tape, I was charmed by the fact that the monkeys took over, in this town, took over the ministries. You remember that? God, that was wonderful. I wish it had gone on, that they finally got them away. It's a terrible disaster for India, I think, because the ministries were spending all their time keeping the monkeys from opening their refrigerators, which they learned to do. And that's a very good occupation for such people. The monkeys were libertarians. They understood that you have to get, the government off your back, the monkey on your back. Yeah, they understood that. But so my theme then is, my overall theme is, that it's ideas about each other that matter most. It's odd that Max Weber didn't get this, because the great scholar, and if you haven't read the Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, go read it. Stop what you're doing now, listening to me, go away, and go get that book and read it, because it's a great book. But it's like Marx, who wrote great books that were largely mistaken. Max Weber wrote a book that was a great book, but largely mistaken. It's not about our psychology. It's about our sociology. And it's odd that one of the founders of modern sociology didn't have a sociological approach to one of his central issues. And I think, to conclude, I think there's a fact about the modern world that if we get it into our heads, if I can persuade you to inscribe this on your heart and maybe on your hand, so you keep looking at it and you remember it the way young people do. If you'd write this with your pen on your hand, I think you would understand modern economic growth a lot better and would not make the mistakes that people usually make about it, and it's this. I say that since the caves, which way, I had the caves in that direction. Since the caves, $3 a day has been the normal course of human life, and it goes like this, it goes like this. My finger has the magic powers of scientific representation, so it goes along. $3 a day, $3 a day, and here's as far as the cameraman wants me to go, and we're at 1800. And then in countries that embrace the bourgeois revaluation, as I call it, the sociological change, and that embrace what I call the bourgeois deal. You let me, un bourgeois, make profit, improve in market-tested improvement. You let me do that. And in the third act of the drama, I'll make you rich. That's what happened. Because what happened in 1800 in countries that embraced this, or were able to, sometimes they wanted to embrace it but weren't allowed to by their imperial masters or whatever. Income, $3 a day, there it is, $3 a day, goes, whoosh, that the whoosh is important. It goes, whoosh. It goes up by a factor of 30. So a country like Italy, about $90 a day, compared with 3. A country like the United States, $130 a day, compared with $3 a day. A country like part of my ancestry is Norwegian. My Norwegian ancestors went from $3 a day to $145 a day. this kind of transformation is utterly unique in history. It never happened before. There would be times, such as in the time around 1600 of the great Mughal emperors, the time of Shakespeare in England, but the time of the empire, the height of the Mughal Empire in India, when places like the lower Ganges Plain were very rich, at least by world standards. And in a peaceful, law-abiding communities, such as those places had, income would go up by what? A factor of 2 over what it was before, say. This applied to the lower Rhine, which is Holland, to the lower Yangtze in China. These were all rich places that if there wasn't war going on all the time, they could double the time of the good Roman emperors, the Antonines, 1st and 2nd century CE. But we're not talking about a doubling. We're talking about a factor of 30. Indeed, if you allow for improved quality of production, I mean, after all, TVs get better. Economics gets better, well, sometimes. Medicine gets better. Until 1925, it's been said by an authority on these matters, it was a bad idea to go to a doctor for most things. If you had a broken arm, yes, but for most other things, stay away from the doctor. So if you include quality, it's more like a factor of 100. A factor of 100 is 9,900% over the base. The factor of 30 is 2,900% over the base. Any conceivable redistribution of profits would raise the income of the rest of us, or the very poor, say, by 20%, 30%, one time only. Contrast with this the percentage gain from an improving economy. The percentage gain there is not 25 or 30%, it's 2,900%, or 9,900% for the poorest among us. So the modern world hasn't been caused by, I don't know, by trade unions. I belonged to one, by the way. When I was a kid, I belonged to the National Maritime Union until I discovered there weren't any jobs. Now I belong to the faculty union at my university. My friends in the English department were delighted when Deirdre signed the card. They were very excited because I'm known among them as a conservative. But trade unions is not how we became rich. Redistribution is not how we became rich. Minimum wage laws is not how we became rich. We became rich by gigantically increasing the size of the pie. And once you really get that, when you really believe this astonishing increase, that a society where people are free and a society in which they are dignified, a society, therefore, in which ordinary people are encouraged is a good word, come to have the courage to improve, to imagine improvements. improvements by way of innovation, not by improvements by breaking into the landlord's house and stealing his gold. That's an improvement, I admit it. But it's a one-time improvement. Whereas this other engine, released in Northwestern Europe uniquely in the 17th and 18th century, really makes poor people better off. So as much as I admire the work of many of my friends on the left, and I'm a Christian, I'm an Anglican, so I admire their kind of attitude of wanting to help the poor. I keep trying to explain to them, you want to help the poor? Agree to the bourgeois deal. Let me profit, and in the third act, I'll make you all rich. And that's what happened. Thank you.